right, everybody. Well, good morning. Welcome to Restoration Church. So glad that you're here. Those of you in the room, welcome. How we feeling? You can do a little better than that. How we feeling? There we go. There it is. For those of you online, I can hear you. You're louder than them. It's great. So glad that you're here. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to say hi and just say thanks for tuning in and carving time out of your week. We know all of us are so busy. I think it's no small thing that you would take time out of your week, whether online or here in person, to say, I know that I need something from God, that I've come here to gain something from my soul, and so many of you have come here to give something back to God through worship, through serving, through giving, and we're just so grateful that this is a part of your story and a part of your rhythm each week, and we're just thrilled that you're here with us. Well, like Pastor Katie said, my name is Kurt, and I'm the other lead pastor here, and I am excited to continue in the conversation we've been in for the last number of weeks called The Thing Beneath the Thing. And what we're going after is this question that we've all bumped into at some point in our life. When something comes out of us, we say something, we respond, we react in a way that feels like, quote unquote, out of character for us. And we're like, where did that come from? And we recognize, as we've navigated this conversation, as we've talked through the things that are underneath the things on the surface of our life, that there's always something underneath, and it takes a lot of courage to actually go beneath the surface and ask the question, what is brewing deeper in this place of our life called the soul? Right? What is actually happening in the place that God and humanity love to play together, whether we know how to put words to that or not, no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum, that your soul is actually the truest part of who you are. And so we've taken the courage to say, because of Jesus, we can actually go to those places and ask that question, what's underneath the thing? Right? Rather than just filling it with activity or distraction or addiction, we want to ask the question, hey, when all of that stuff kind of fades away, what can actually help us have permanent change in our life? And so, as I've said each week, but I want to give credit where credit is due, this entire series is inspired by a book called The Thing Beneath the Thing by a guy named Steve Carter. He's kind of been our guide as we've walked through. I had some people last week when we talked on narratives, pinched a nerve apparently, to ask for this book. So we have copies available in the lobby if you'd like. Steve hooked us up with a discount, so they're cheaper here than Amazon. So that's a win. You've never heard that sentence before, but we would love for you to pick it up if you'd like. We can always get more. But really, THING is an acronym, and it stands for triggers, right, is the T. What is the setup that sets you off? What's that thing that lets you know, oh, there's more going on, right? If that's where it always starts, is this thing that kind of feels like we blew it out of proportion. We went to 11 when we shouldn't have. That's our trigger. That's what sets us off. And then the question is, where do we go to escape that pain? And that's our hideouts usually. That was the next week. That's the H. Where do we go to hide, to ease the pain, to escape what might be going on? And usually when we recognize that we've done that, we feel really insecure. That's the I, right? We feel like there's something going on. We begin to feel or tell ourselves or remind ourselves of a story we were told that really isn't necessarily true about who we are, ultimately at the core of who we are, but it causes us to feel really insecure. And we talked about how God actually wants to speak to our insecurities to remind you of who you are in Him. Last week, we talked about narratives. What are the false stories that we write, the things that we create about others? And, it was a really intense message, and I only got hate about it from people that don't know me. So that's a win, all right? That's good. Those people, that's fine. But thanks for engaging. If you missed it, I would encourage you to watch it on our YouTube page. It has now passed up the views from our sex talk back in February. So that feels like a goal that we didn't set, that we actually hit. So there you go. People love to talk about stuff. There you go. So today we are finishing up the acronym with G, which is for grace, right? Where is this place that we discover what it actually means to become whole and holy and spiritually healthy? What is this ongoing process of growth that God invites us into? And I think for many of us, right, we have to ask these key questions to find those buried things first before today's conversation is actually going to matter. Because if for many of us, we're drifting through life, or even if we're honest, those of us that are trying to follow Jesus, drifting through our spiritual journey, where we just kind of can go with the flow and we know the answers and we have the rhythm, it's easy for us to think, oh, I had grace. That was fine back then. Like, for by grace you have been saved, past tense, right? But really what I believe that Jesus wants to illuminate to all of us, what he's illuminated to me through the story we're going to read in the scriptures today, as I've been preparing for this message, is that grace is not a one-time event, but it's an ongoing experience of life with Jesus. That actually, for those of us that are trying as best we can to love and follow Jesus, we live and swim and move in this vast ocean of God's grace in every moment, more than we even actually realize. And this is the question we're going after today. And so we're going to dig deep again. We're going to invite some healing, perhaps learn new ways to operate so that we can actually experience the life that Jesus created for you and I to live. And so if you're here and you're our guest, if you're new to this idea of God, someone invited you, or if you're watching online for the first time and you don't really know what you think about God or think about Jesus or the Bible, today is an incredible day. I'm so glad that you're here, because if you get nothing else from this experience of following Jesus today, I think it's the most important thing that you can gather, because it's important that we understand that following Jesus doesn't get us where we want to go. Following Jesus gets you where Jesus goes. And I think it's really important, especially in our cultural context, that there's a lot of people that like to wrap Jesus up as your next best self-help mode, right? He's your best next magic pill. Is, just add Jesus to your life and you're going to get everything you want. Health, wealth, happiness, here we go, right? And like, wouldn't that be awesome, right? I mean, that'd be great. Like, I would go for it, but that's just not reality, right? Many of you, like me, can share your experience. Actually, following Jesus sometimes causes life to feel a little more uncomfortable. Following Jesus causes us to actually dive into spaces that would be easier to avoid if we didn't have to listen to what he said, right? Following Jesus causes us to actually offer forgiveness rather than hold grudges, to be generous instead of stingy and self-focused. Following Jesus doesn't get me where I want to go. Following Jesus gets me where Jesus goes. And so to kind of unpack that together today, right, this goal of Jesus, when we talk about this idea of grace, is really encapsulated, I think, in one of the best kind of short form passages of Scripture in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 15. And we call it the Gospel of Luke. Really, it's just Luke was hired by a guy who was exploring what it meant to follow Jesus. And he said, hey, like, there's a lot of narratives swirling around, a lot of stories about this Jesus of Nazareth that lived a couple decades ago. I would love to hire you, because I have some resources, to create an account, to do some journalism, to interview people that were there, to ask good questions, and to discover, what did Jesus say? What did he do? So we can really ask and answer the question, who was he and what was he about? And so again, if you find yourself this morning, whether you've been going to church for a long time or you're new, asking like, hey, what's the core essence of what it means to follow Jesus? Luke is a great place to start, because the reason we have the Gospel of Luke is not because of someone who followed Jesus themselves, but because of someone who was curious, who had doubts, who had questions, and wanted to get evidence from eyewitnesses and discover the truth. And so I love the Gospel of Luke. And in Luke 15, Jesus is confronted by his critics, right? Even Jesus had haters, right? So that's a good thing for us to understand. People were criticizing him and trying to understand and make sense of this new way of talking about God that he was all about. And they confront him, and to answer their question, I love this because he's a master communicator. He doesn't answer their direct question. He instead tells 3 stories. And whenever Jesus repeats something, it's always very important to pay attention, because he's really trying to drive a point home. And so if you have a Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 15. If you're following online, you can open another tab and go to Luke chapter 15 in the search bar. If you're here in the building and you want to follow along, we'd love for you to grab the Bible in the seat back pocket directly in front of you. It looks just like this. If you grab this Bible, you can flip it open to page 628, where we're going to start. It's going to be on the left-hand side. And again, we say this every time you're here, but we know that this book can be complicated and challenging, and you might have a lot of questions about it, but we believe there's life and transformation to be found in the words of the Bible. And so if you don't have a copy of the Scriptures, you can read and understand. If you grew up and you're like, yeah, I read the Bible, it sounds like Shakespeare and not for me, like, we want you to take this one home with you today, all right? You can steal it from church. That's all right. That's totally fine with us. We love replacing them after each gathering. And so in Luke 15, it kind of captures these 3 stories, right? Where Jesus tells 3 stories to answer this question, what is God really like? And it's such a profound passage. And again, for me, it's personally profound because I find myself in these stories. And my hope is, as we walk through them together, whether you've heard it or not, you will find yourself in this story as well. So again, this didn't actually happen. This is a story that Jesus tells to tell his followers and his critics, and I believe us as well, a lesson and a picture into who God is and what he's like. And every time Jesus tells one of these stories, these parables, these narratives, right, there's someone in the story that represents God. There's someone in the story that represents us. And there's often someone in the story that represents the people that we would love to discount, that we would love to say, oh, they're too far. That's not okay, right? I'm better than them, right? We talked about all those things a little bit last week, but that's true for all of us. And so as you kind of unpack this, the twist shows up, all right? So starting in verse 11 of chapter 15, it says this: to illustrate this point further, Jesus told them this story. Again, it's his third of three stories. It said, a man had two sons. And the younger son told his father, I would love my share of your estate now, before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. Now, again, if you're a parent, imagine hearing this. And then we're in Western context, in the Middle East in the first century. I mean, this was the perhaps most incredibly rude and disrespectful thing someone could say. What this younger son is actually saying is, hey, Dad, let's just call a spade a spade. Our relationship sucks. Like, it's as if you're already dead to me, so I should just get what's coming to me anyways now, because then I can enjoy it, have more time to spend your money. And again, so to the shock and awe of Jesus' first century audience, and maybe even to you as well today, Jesus says the father agrees, and he divides his wealth between his two sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved off to a distant land, right? Where would you move if you won the lottery, right? Most people win the lottery and move to San Diego. They could win the lottery and still not afford to live in San Diego now, but we'll keep moving, all right? So he decides, hey, I'm going to get out of wherever he's living. He's taking his money, and he goes to a distant land, maybe where he couldn't afford to live before. And he spends all his money on wild living, right? About this time, his money ran out. I love that Jesus skips all the way to the good part, right? Spends all his money on wild living, and his money runs out. And you're like, serves him right? That's definitely what the first century audience was thinking. Serves him right. His money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land at the same time, and he began to starve. He began to get super hungry. So he persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and so the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. Again, if you know anything about Jewish literature, pigs are considered unclean. So now is he not only incredibly rude, incredibly broke, but now he's spiritually outcast. So Jesus is just hitting all the bangers. He's like, yep, that one, you got a narrative about that, let's get that one, right? He's just lining them all up to really make this younger son the absolute pivotal, edge of acceptability in first century Jewish culture. It gets worse. The young man became so hungry that even the pods, the leftover food he was feeding the pigs, looked good to him. Right? He's that hungry that he wants to eat the pig slop, but still no one gave him anything. Now, if you've heard this story before, I want you to suspend your previous biblical knowledge for just a minute and try to actually get into this narrative. Actually get into this story as if you're hearing it for the first time, and think about what this would mean or feel like to you if you were listening to Jesus tell the story. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, I remember even my dad's hired servants have enough food, even to spare. And I'm sitting here dying of hunger, wanting to eat the pig slop. I know what I'll do. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son, so please take me on as a hired servant. All right, so push the pause button, and especially if you've heard the story before, push the pause button right there. This is the younger son's master plan. Is I'm going to go home and I'm just going to work for my dad. Like, I'm just going to swallow my pride enough to be like, you know what? I had an opportunity. I thought I was smarter than you. I blew it. I don't need a relationship to work for you. I'll just do my job. But I'm so hungry that feels worth it. I'm so hungry, I will even eat my pride. Ever been there? Right? You ever had those moments where you're like, this is so bad, swallowing my pride and facing this thing I don't want to face feels better than the pain I'm in right now. And so this younger son goes home, and all of these people listening to Jesus tell the story, religious or not, are thinking, maybe. I mean, like, maybe your dad will hire you because you've proven yourself to be so responsible with finances, right? Definitely trustworthy. Maybe if he's really, really gracious, your dad will let you come back and work for him. This is where the twist happens, right? So he returns to his father, and every time I read this, I get emotional. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. In first century Jewish culture, men did not run. Because when I run as a man to something, whether it's to save someone from danger, to run after a child, to get somewhere faster, I am by my physical actions implicating that that thing is more important than me. And in first century Jewish culture, men did not ever run. And so when Jesus says his father ran to him, that's the first gasp in the story. What? No, the father certainly stood on top of the porch with a scowl on his face, waiting for his son to grovel all the way home. Jesus, this story is so unrealistic. I'm not finished. He runs to his son, embraced him, makes himself ceremonially unclean, and kisses him. The father shows up to where his son is. His son begins his speech, says to his father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, which is true, by the way. He's not hyperbolic. He is telling the truth. I've sinned both against heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. His father disregards it and says to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. They're like, you sure you don't want to give him a shower first? He's stanky, right? Get the signet ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. Dress him up like who he actually is. Put the symbol on his hand of his sonship. And while you're at it, kill the calf we've been fattening, for we must, not I want to, we must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found. And the party began. And they're like, cool, let's party. A little weird, but do you know what everybody's been saying about this son of yours? Cool, we're dancing, whatever. But yeah, I know. He was in Vegas. Yeah. That's the same guy. Yeah. You want to get second? Yeah. Let's go. Whatever. Everybody's just happy to party. But imagine, for real, friends, imagine if this happened at your workplace. Imagine if this happened at your family gathering, those of you watching online. Imagine this happened at a church. Someone came in smelling like that. The stories about what was going on was well known. Father was not ignorant to all that had been said, all the whispers that had happened over those years, all the stories that had been fabricated about why he let his son go and what an irresponsible father he was because he gave his wealth to his son. And does he even know he's spending his money on prostitutes and parties? We can't trust. Most scholars believe that if this were to actually happen, the father would lose his wealth because the word would get out that he's not a good person to do business with by guilt by association. Jesus has made this story so incredibly extreme that this outcome of a party to celebrate was absolutely incomprehensible. So again, you maybe heard this story, right? You may have heard this story before. You're like, I get it, the prodigal son, I've seen the Rembrandt painting, it's very cool, very meaningful. I'm so emotional, right? But here's why this really matters. Is again, if the story stopped there, it'd be a beautiful picture of God's grace. And the story would be incredibly valuable to keep telling so that we can understand, this obviously in the story, the father in the story represents God, the perfect father, not a representation of perhaps your earthly father. Some of you had great representations in your earthly father. Some of you did not. And what he's saying is there is this idea of God as father who is willing to get dirty with you, to go where you are, to run to you because his compassion is so much greater than your circumstance. And if that's where the story ended, that would be an incredible story. especially in the first century, but even to this day, even for your life and mine, so powerful. Something we absolutely need to believe and grapple with and say, is God really like that? Could God actually be that good, that kind? Not to dismiss all the things that I've done. Father was very aware. But to restore me in spite of all that? Like, is God really like that? If that was where the story ended, that would be worth telling. But as you can tell, there is a couple more words before it says 16, right? And Jesus isn't done telling the story. And again, try to suspend your biblical knowledge if you have it, right? And really grapple with how disgraceful this moment was, right? So there's a DJ, filet mignons on the barbecue, right? Everybody's having a good time. Bum, bum, bum. Verse 25. Meanwhile, picture Stephen Colbert. Meanwhile, the older son. Meanwhile, the older brother was in the field working. He finished his job. As he returns home, he heard music and dancing. You ever showed up too late to a party you didn't know was happening? I mean, it's the best feeling, right? Everybody's 2 or 3 drinks in. You're like, what is going on? Like, it's Tuesday, y'all. Like, right? Working in the field, he comes home. He hears music and dancing. He asks one of the servants what's going on. Your brother's back, he was told. So your father's killed the fattened calf, and we're celebrating because of his safe return. What? Are you serious? There's probably other words, but they're not in Scripture, right? Like, are you serious? So the older brother was angry and would not go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, all these years I've slaved for you. I mean, listen to this sass, right? Never once refused to do a single thing you ever told me to do. And all that time, you never gave me even a young goat for a feast with my friends. I mean, you hear it, right? Like, some of you got teenagers. You're like, yep, And I mean, guys, this is where it just hits me. Yet this son of yours comes back from squandering your money on prostitutes, and you celebrate by killing the fatted calf. I mean, everybody knows, Dad. Everybody knows what he was doing. You know, I know, everybody knows. Why would you celebrate him? Like, he ruined the family reputation. He told you he wished that you were dead. And he went off and like wasted all, like, it serves him right. Like, God aside, Dad, I know we're Jewish and whatever, but like, just karma, let it happen. Like, life comes back around to bite you, right? Like, good for him. Like, come on, Dad. Really? Really? We're going to throw a party? Like, the thing we've been saving for and preparing for like the religious feast, we're going to use that now for him? Really? I mean, if I'm honest, like, I'm always the older brother. I always have been the older brother. It's always so much easier for me, but I did it right. I mean, I'm not perfect, but like, I was good. It's better than him, for sure. And this is why this is so important that the story continues beyond just the celebration. The father says to the older son, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me. You're right. And everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate this happy day. For your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found. And then Jesus drops the mic and moves on. And we are left wondering, what happened. And if I'm honest, for me, when I really get into this story, what my hope is for you is when you really get into the story, which is not an isolated incident, it's just the one I chose to talk about today, Jesus is showing us so clearly that the essence of grace is so much bigger, so much more powerful, and so much more challenging than we often think. Because, friends, grace don't care what I think is fair. That's my big idea for today. Grace doesn't care what I think is fair. And grace doesn't care what you think is fair either. And yet, if we're honest, we are addicted, especially as religious people. You're like, I don't take that title. That's fine, me neither. But you know what I'm saying? Like, we think fair is better, especially for other people. I mean, grace is so easy for us to receive theoretically, right? But it's so challenging for us to give practically. Because grace, we know at the essence of our soul, grace doesn't care what I think is fair. Fairness and grace do not play together. They can cross paths, but like grace just keeps on walking. Running, actually, according to the scriptures. And this is what's so difficult for us as we talk about the thing beneath the thing, is we have to ask the question, where do I feel entitled for good behavior over the years? And I think God owes me something. And it keeps me unwilling to celebrate God's radical, unfair extensions of grace in the world. Like super practically. You ever have those moments where something happens and you're like, why? Like in God's like all-knowingness, like, why did that happen? Like we have conversations like we had last week where we go, like, why would God allow bad things? Like, why didn't God intervene and just like let the shooter in Buffalo run out of gas before he got to the grocery store? Like, why couldn't God stop something bad? Right? We all have those questions, right? Which are legitimate and fair. But then there's the real questions of like, how come like good things seem to happen to like terrible people? Like, for example, I was thinking about this today, and this is like silly, but it's a real example. Like, we got our like PPP loan, right, throughout pandemic, like as a church, right? It was like, cool, we got some money. That was super helpful. It helped us get through our COVID, slump where we had to pay rent on a building for 18 months we couldn't use. So grateful. So glad you're here. Thanks for being here. And then you read all these stories that have come out of like people who have hustled the system for millions and bought Lamborghinis. And I'm just like, I would like a Mazda. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need a Lamborghini. Something that runs would be great. Like it's just one of those moments where you're just like, God, why? Like, here's this thing that's supposed to help families in need and small businesses. It's, political things aside, I'm not trying to go there. Just like, why? Like, why? Why do good things happen to bad people sometimes? And this is the space. This is the space that is so challenging for us if we're really going to think about grace. Because God invites us to not just believe that He is gracious, but to actually become gracious ourselves. And I think that's where we miss it. I think that's where it's so important as we talk about the things that are beneath the thing, to really answer the question, what does it look like to have grace for myself, to have grace for other people, to be in a community of grace? Because it's one thing to believe that God's that way. That's what the older brother obviously understood. But the reason that story is so powerful, and the reason I believe Jesus ended it where He ended it, is because it wasn't just enough to believe that God was that way. That's religion. It was actually more important to ask, where am I? Because Jesus tells the story, it leaves us craving the answer to the question, like, what did the older brother do? The story ends suspended out in the field with God saying, through the father figure, hey, would you come inside? And we call this story the prodigal son. It's actually a story of two prodigal sons. One external, one internal. I mean, notice the language that the father says. Yeah, you've stayed with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate. Like this is not optional. The father goes out to see both sons in the story. We often focus only on the first. One left and came back, and the father ran to him. One stayed at a distance, and the father went to him. And friends, you and I need to really grapple with which son are we? Because the end of the story leaves us craving the answer to that question. What did he do? At least for me, what happened? Did the older brother ever go into the party? Did he ever reconcile? Did he ever face his younger brother for the rest of their life? And was their relationship restored? What happened? And I think what Jesus is trying to do is not just point out, Kurt, you're often the older brother. I think he's trying to say, yeah, that craving you have for that true older brother, that true son that would actually embrace the father's will and go into the party to reconcile with the one who had screwed up his life and harmed him, harmed the older brother's reputation. Jesus would want us to know that he actually is that true older brother. He is the one that would extend grace to you and invites you to extend grace to others. See, when we think about grace, if we limit it to simply a past tense event, I was saved through grace by faith, Ephesians 2:8-9. I did the Bible drill when I was a kid. I get it, right? Like, that's true. That's good. But if that's where grace stops in my life or in yours, I will easily and quickly become the older brother again. And not only will I miss out on the party, but the longer I even try to follow Jesus, and the smarter I get, and the more I learn, and the better my life shows up, and the more the Holy Spirit does a work in my soul that I'm transformed from the inside out, I will begin to take credit for what God has done in my life. I will begin to think that I am the one that has made me holy and whole and spiritually healthy. Because I will gain this skin of self-righteousness that Jesus is trying to help me shed. I mean, this is the question for all of us, is will we respond to the invitation of our Heavenly Father to come in and enjoy the party between divinity and humanity where all are welcomed, all belong, and all are loved by God as they are, or will we stay out in the field of resentment? And this shows up in so many areas of our life. For many of us, let's be honest, like it's easier for us to extend theoretical love and grace to people in extreme circumstances that we don't know than it is for us to actually love our spouse when they piss us off. Like, let's just be honest. It's easier for us to be like, oh, all are welcome, but never invite somebody. It's so easy for us to be like, I want to be a church that's this way and about these things, but I don't want to actually be like that and be about those things. But I hope we or they are. I mean, this is so challenging. Like, in the spaces of your life, when you think about extending grace, what jumps out at you first? People you need to give grace to, or grace you actually need to receive? Because I think for many of us, when we think about grace, we love to default to fair. And we can theologically put grace on a shelf and be like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't get what was coming to me, like from a afterlife sort of thing. But like, what about on Monday? On Monday, am I willing to extend and receive
grace. When these things show up in my life, my triggers or my hideouts, my insecurities or the narratives that I've discovered, oh my gosh, I have more narratives than I thought I did, right? Am I willing to actually bring those into the light, knowing that grace meets me there? Because just in spite of myself, we have a God who will run to me and a God who invites his church to run alongside him. See, in the story, the Father sprinted alone. But actually what the church is designed to be is a relay. That God actually has handed us the baton for this season of our life. That when Jesus ascended into heaven, he hands the baton to his church. And he says, all those stories I told you about, all those pictures I gave you, as much as I tried to demonstrate in my own life what God is actually like so you can understand, hey, this is what God is actually about. Now I said, it's your turn. We prayed this in our servant leader circle this morning, that God has risked his reputation on us. And I think that's crazy sometimes because I know me. But that is the design that God has given us. And before that feels too heavy for us to bear, like you have to step into perfectionism, remember that all is grace. All is grace. You don't have to do it on your own, that God is inviting you to swim and sink deep into the endless ocean of his grace. And the people that I know that live deepest in communion with Jesus, they really understand this. They've understood that grace is like oxygen. It's just what we survive on. And it gives them courage and it helps them live more free and more open in their life because they've received grace fully on a regular basis, not just one time in the past. Dallas Willard, a famous theologian who passed away a few years ago, is famous for saying this line that has always challenged me. It says, "Saints burn through more grace than sinners ever could." And to know Dallas's writing is to know that he refers to saints and sinners interchangeably very often. But he's speaking to our perception. That our perception, those that are, of good rapport, those who are following Jesus, they use more grace than those who are running from him ever could. And for years, I shamed myself because I hated, again, how that story ended. Just suspended out in the field. And so many times in my own life, I knew of moments and stories and interactions where I stayed out in the field of resentment or of self-righteousness. And it was when I realized that this story isn't about the prodigal son, it's a story of two sons. That God pursues both in different ways because his grace is a custom-fit job. As John Ortberg would say, it's tailor-made, not mass-produced. That the Father knew how to engage with each of his sons, and God knows exactly how his grace needs to land on you this morning. That Jesus says, I am that true older brother. I'm the one that doesn't stand at a distance, but I show up in the center of heaven's party here on earth. That my desire for grace is the same as the Father's desire. Because I know that God's desire for me fuels my ability to want to, even when it's complicated and challenging, to extend grace to others. And so the question becomes for us, as a church, as individuals, in your family, in your neighborhood, at your place of work, what would happen if we treated every prodigal, including the ones that stayed home and did their job, but were secretly bitter inside, which you might see in the mirror tomorrow morning. I know I will. What if we treated every prodigal the way that this father treated his sons? Like that's the question. Because what I love about this story is that grace doesn't just find you, but grace will find you out. Like this father knew the thing that each son needed to hear. He knew the stories of the son that had blown his inheritance. He knew the stories that were swirling around town of how he had abandoned the family name and brought shame to their legacy, and what he knew that son needed was to be reminded that there's nothing he could do to actually escape the family he was a part of. And so he puts the ring on his finger and he celebrates. And maybe that's what you need this morning. Maybe that's what you need to know. Is that no matter what you did last weekend, no matter what you think about God, no matter how far you feel you've gone or screwed up, or no matter how many older brothers have told you that was too much, the heart of God says to you through his grace that if that's what you need to be reminded of, there is nothing that you could do to escape the family that you actually truly belong to. As you get underneath the thing in your life, you're like, whoa, this is from that past trauma or that historical event, and I'm terrified to go there. God says, you got to remember who you really are. You got to remember who you really are. And for others of us, grace will find us. The Father found the older brother in the field, and it will find us out. Because the thing we need to hear is it actually not dissimilar, but in a different way from, there's nothing you can do to lose God's love for you. There's nothing that the younger son could do to escape the grace of the Father. There's nothing that the older son could do to earn it either. Right? Grace is not opposed to effort, but it is opposed to earning, again, as Dallas Willard would say. And when I, or perhaps you, get in our soul that there's something that we're entitled to because of our behavior, or how long we've been doing church, or how much we give, or how good our marriage looks on Instagram, or whatever it might be for you, whatever that thing is for you that makes you feel a little bit prideful, a little bit self-righteous, a little bit better than your neighbor or your coworker, or I can't believe they would do that. God says grace is going to find you and me out too in those spaces and tell us what we need to hear. That you also can't earn your way into this family because you're just in it. You're just everything I have is yours. Quit wasting your time trying to prove it to me or prove it to yourself and receive it. And see, that's the challenge with grace, especially if you're an achiever or a go-getter, right? Is that so much in our life we run after proving. We run after earning. And so grace is this counterintuitive, counterproductive thing in our soul where the only way to really experience it is to receive it, is to surrender to it, is to say, if it is, I welcome it. There are big and small things that show up in your life. There are going to be things that show up in your life this week. And there's going to be a whisper from a friend or a spouse or a partner or maybe just from the Holy Spirit quietly in your soul that simply says, what's that about? I have grace for that if you'll receive it. And so for many of us, the thing we need to do this week that will actually help us make sense of all the things beneath our things, that will help us move forward with God, is to receive the grace that is already so present in every circumstance. And so, to help with that, I want to lead you through a quick prayer, and we're going to post this on our Instagram later this week, that perhaps is a helpful prayer for you this week, a process for you to go through as you face those things, as those things show up in your life. It's called the Welcoming Prayer by Father Thomas Keating. And it simply says this, and maybe it's just for you right now in this moment, you could just close your eyes or open your hands and just let these words fall where they may in your soul and in your story. And it simply says this: welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, for esteem, for approval or pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or even myself. I am open to the love and presence of God and God's actions within. Amen. And perhaps for you, as you hear those words, you're like, there's no way I could get there. Say it again. Friends, like this, I think, is where grace finds us, is when we recognize that even the things we would not choose could actually be for our growth. This ongoing process of grace that helps us become whole, holy, and spiritually healthy. I mean, this is what Jesus modeled for us. After he was killed and buried and resurrected, after he sees the disciples having risen from the dead, John shares that Jesus sees the disciples, almost all of whom had left and deserted him. In his hour of need, they were gone. I mean, imagine how you would react to people that came back into your life after they left you when you needed them most. I know what I would say. But John records from what he heard in the boat, Jesus on the shore. It says at dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but we couldn't see who he was. The disciples couldn't see who it was. And he calls out to us, friends, which in Greek is translated friends, but the actual Aramaic word is better translated beloved. Have you caught any fish? And if you know the story, he goes on to feed them breakfast and show them hospitality, which was the ethic in first century Jewish culture. Friends, have you caught any fish? Beloved. I would have maybe chose the word like deserter. You know, like let's be honest. Like, hey, deserters, you got nothing, right? I told you shouldn't have left me. Coming back now, huh? You know what I mean? Like we have those, like that's how rap songs are written, right? So instead, Jesus says, beloved. And Peter, so ashamed of his denial and going back to his old life, dives into the water and swims to the beach. Because I think he knew somewhere in his soul, he probably didn't even recognize what he was, his body just went into motion because his soul was screaming for grace and restoration. And he knew, in spite of what he had done, the best place to find grace was in the person of Jesus. And so what if you realize today that that's actually how God sees you? That your greatest regret doesn't have to define you anymore. That grace will find you, Jesus will come to you, but he will also find you out to help you grow. That he invites us to live rather in freedom and vulnerability than rather under the control of another person, of our narratives, of our past. And my hope is that you and I this week would become like Peter in that moment. So it doesn't matter what people say or how it looks. I need to get to grace because I need it. Some of us perhaps for the first time, and some of us for the trillionth time, that we need the grace of God, and so we will dive into his endless ocean just like Peter dove into that water to get to Jesus. And if that's where you're at this morning, and I don't know all of your stories, but for some of you, perhaps that is the thing you most need to hear. Maybe you're watching online and you're listening to this later and you're like, I know I need that grace. Whether for the first time I need to come back to it, I've taken my life and done my own thing. And I'm coming home and I'm afraid of what God might say. And this morning you recognize that God sees you a long way off, doesn't wait for you to come to him, but he has run to you. And if that's what this message has done, is to show you that God is running and pursuing you, we want to celebrate that with you. And so if you have a cell phone, you can text the word forever free to 94000. If you're watching online, text forever free to 94000. All that's going to do is it's going to help our team connect with you and begin a relationship with Jesus, or come back to a grace-based relationship with Jesus. Maybe you've done the religious thing and you need a grace-based relationship with Jesus. Maybe you have your stories of why you're better than others or why you don't need it as much, and Jesus wants to save you from that too. Maybe you simply just need to be reminded that no matter what you've done or how much you've done, you can't escape the family that you actually belong to. And that, I believe, is why grace is so incredibly powerful and important. Not a one-time event a long time ago, but today and tomorrow morning and Tuesday and moment by moment in our life. This is how we actually love and follow Jesus. So I'd love to pray for you. And I'm just going to pray that welcoming prayer. And I would invite you to open your hands, to put your body in a posture if you feel comfortable, to say, God, I'm open to what I want my soul to be like. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We welcome everything that comes to us today because we know it is for our healing. We welcome all thoughts and feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. We let go of our desire for power and control. We let go of our desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. We let go of our desire for survival and security. We let go of our desire to change any situation, condition, person, or even ourselves. And we open our hands and our hearts and our lives. We open our souls to the love and presence of God and God's action within us. Amen and amen.